Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Happy Friday, everybody. I hope you've had a productive week, and as usual, I wish you all a restful weekend ahead. The last few years have seen an escalation in global trade frictions focused on China. In recent months, these tensions have intensified, with measures and accusations of overcapacity coming not just from the developed world, but major developing nations too, from India and Brazil to most recently Indonesia. On Monday, Turkey initiated anti-dumping investigations against China's tin-plated steel coil and stainless steel cold-rolled coil. New official data appear to show that these moves from the world are having real-world effects on Chinese exports and are beginning to hurt. According to China Trade Remedies Information, a platform under the Ministry of Commerce in Beijing, in the first half of this year, China faced 64 anti-dumping investigations from trading partners, an increase of 166% year-on-year. India launched 16 of the anti-dumping investigations on China, with the United States and Brazil each initiating 7. China has also faced 13 anti-subsidy investigations in the first half of this year, half from the US, nearly triple the number during the same period last year. China has responded with 7 anti-dumping investigations this year, with EU food being hit the hardest. Mei Yuan, assistant professor of economics at Singapore Management University, noted with the data, quote, "In the long term, China is likely to face increasing trade friction cases. This trend has already begun, as the EU has decided to investigate China's electric vehicles." End quote. Hong Kong-based South China Morning Post reporting on this development notes that in eras past, the World Trade Organization and its courts might have served as a venue for these disputes, but with no quorum of judges for its appellant body, any complaint a state could take to the international trade grouping would go without reply. Then yesterday, Thursday, the European Commission announced that it will impose provisional tariffs on electric vehicles imported from China, and these tariffs will begin today, leaving a 4-month window for both sides to negotiate a solution before the temporary duties become final in November. This coming after an investigation found that their supply chains benefited from state subsidies. Soon after this announcement, a spokesperson for China's Ministry of Commerce told reporters, quote, "China and the EU will expedite consultations over the tariff issue to reach a mutually acceptable solution as quickly as possible." End quote. Starting today, Friday, state-owned automaker SAIC Motor Corp Limited will face a 37.6% tariff, while Volvo Car AB, parent Geely, and BYD Co Limited will be hit with added charges of 19.9% and 17.4% respectively. The new tariffs come on top of the existing 10% rate, making the total duties as high as 48%. The Commission said that other EV producers in China that cooperated with the investigation but haven't been sampled will be subject to a weighted average duty of 20.8%, while firms that did not cooperate will face a 37.6% added tariff. In the run-up to the announcement of these tariffs, the European Commission released a 712-page report on the many layers of subsidies it argues the Chinese government provides to domestic firms. UK-based Reuters provided a useful summary of some of the report, including, quote, "Support for state-owned enterprises. The Chinese government funnels both indirect and direct support to state-owned enterprises, or ones it effectively controls, even with minority ownership. That includes low-cost financing via state-owned banks for state-owned firms regardless of profitability. Provincial and local governments also provide financial assistance." End quote. And, quote, "The Communist Party exercises a great level of control at state-owned firms, including those where it holds a minority stake, and is intertwined with management of those firms." End quote. And, quote, "Since 2005, the Chinese government has focused support on its EV makers through subsequent 5-year plans, including EV production targets, the Made in China 2025 initiative, and various subsidies at the national and local level. Direct subsidies for EVs began in 2010 and are still in effect. The purchase tax exemption on EVs, which the Chinese government extended last year through to 2027, amount to $11.9 billion in 2022 alone." end quote. And in what really demonstrates just how pervasive industrial policy can be on so many levels in China, quote, most of China's credit rating agencies are state-owned, which means that most ratings are heavily skewed towards the highest end of the rating scale. By the end of 2020, 96% of Chinese bonds were rated AA or better, with 38% of credit bonds carrying a AAA rating. By contrast, less than 10% of firms receive such high ratings in the US market. Consequently, the information on credit risk derived from a rating by Chinese credit ratings is not directly comparable to the ratings in other markets. Better credit ratings help companies obtain financing. End quote. Chinese financial media outlet Taiwan reports that the tariffs announced yesterday are provisional and don't need to be paid until confirmed by a vote of EU governments before the 2nd of November. From Friday, today, EU customs will require Chinese EV exporters to provide bank guarantees to ensure that they have enough money to cover the tariffs. The outlet adds that some Chinese car makers back in China have urged Beijing to adopt the, quote, most severe measures, end quote, including a tax of 25% on large-engined cars made in the EU. Quote, an analyst from a Chinese research institution who did not want to be named believes China will not take any countermeasures for the time being, however, but added these might be possible after November if negotiations fail. End quote. Germany's Auto Association, VDA, this week, fearing retaliation from China, urged the Commission to drop the planned tariffs, citing figures that showed, quote, German manufacturers sold around 10 times as many electric cars in China as Chinese brands in Germany. End quote. The association said tariffs would not enhance European car competitiveness and could harm EU and German companies, many of which rely on Chinese supply chains. German automakers are politically powerful, and we should expect lobbying from them to intensify in the coming weeks. But even in Germany, economic considerations must be balanced with national security concerns. This week, Germany blocked the sale of a Volkswagen subsidiary, MAN Energy Solutions, on national security grounds. A German government review, initiated in September of last year, raised concerns that China might use the gas turbines to power warships. During a press conference, Germany's economy minister said that Berlin welcomes investment from foreign companies, but technologies relevant to public security must be protected from countries, quote, which maybe do not always have a friendly relationship with us, end quote. A spokesperson for China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs on yesterday, said that China opposes the, quote, politicization, end quote, of, quote, normal commercial cooperation, end quote, adding, quote, we hope that Germany will provide a fair, just, and non-discriminatory business environment for companies from all over the world, including Chinese companies, end quote. Europe is the largest export market for Chinese EVs. The above-quoted analyst, speaking to Taiwan, predicts a further decline of 30 to 50% for the entire year, unless the issue is resolved. Next up, we move to Taiwan. But just quickly, if you're enjoying today's video, if you could hit the like button, this is a tremendous help, as is sharing and subscribing. About 42% of regular viewers are not subscribed. If we can get this below 40, that would be amazing. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are also in the description below for those who want to help keep the channel financially sustainable. Thank you so much. Next up, we need to note a development in cross-strait relations this week. On Tuesday, Taipei said that the PRC Coast Guard boarded a Taiwanese fishing boat before steering it to a port in mainland China, demanding that Beijing release the vessel. The fishing boat was intercepted by 2 Chinese vessels on Tuesday in the evening near the Kinmen Archipelago, which lies a short distance off mainland China's coast but is controlled by Taiwan. According to Taiwan's Coast Guard administration, the boat was operating 23.7 nautical miles off a Taiwan-controlled defense outpost near the mainland and within mainland waters when it was stopped. Taiwan dispatched 3 vessels to rescue the boat but were blocked by 3 Chinese boats and were told not to interfere. The statement added that the rescue vessels were called off to avoid escalating the situation into conflict. Beijing says that the trawler was illegally fishing. We remember back in February, 2 Chinese fishermen were drowned while being chased by Taiwan's Coast Guard off that part of the coast. This led to Beijing announcing that it would step up patrols in the waters. On Thursday, Taiwan's National Security Bureau Director General called the PRC act one of possible psychological warfare, adding that Taiwan is working to get the boat released. He told reporters that it was unusual for Chinese officials to board and then detain a Taiwanese trawler. Quote, "They may have done this to demonstrate its jurisdiction over the strait and put pressure on Taiwan's government. We must continue to analyze whether this is a cognitive warfare operation, and we will fully assess what the motivations are for the Chinese communists." End quote. Jiang Cheng, a professor of international relations and strategic studies at Tamkang University in Taiwan, said Beijing may be attempting to establish a new norm. Quote, "It could pave the way for seizing Taiwanese civilian vessels in the future. Our defense and security authorities must closely monitor developments, considering the potential impact on our civilian vessels, including supply ships hired by the military for transport, operating in the contested waters." End quote. Cross-strait ties have soured since William Lai Tingde was elected the president in January. It deteriorated further after Lai, seen by Beijing as a separatist, took office in May and declared that Taiwan and the mainland, quote, "are not subordinate to each other," end quote. Beijing responded by conducting large-scale military drills around Taiwan, which included the simulation of a blockade of the island, which we covered at the time. Finally, for today's episode, this week, Chinese-American political scientist, non-resident senior fellow in the Asia program at the German Marshall Fund of the United States, Min Xin-pei, published a commentary called "How Likely is War Over Taiwan? Watch These 3 Numbers." Let's end by examining a few of his points, which we're now quoting selected excerpts of directly. On the eve of the Ukraine invasion, Russia parked $300 billion, about half of its total foreign exchange reserves, in Western financial institutions, where they were promptly frozen. Blinded by optimistic assumptions of a blitzkrieg victory, he did not stock up on enough artillery shells or components of weapons to wage a protracted war of attrition. Chinese leaders are not likely to make the same mistakes. To put China in a better position for a potentially drawn-out conflict with the US, they will pay particular attention to 3 measures of self-sufficiency: the levels of China's foreign exchange reserves held in Western financial institutions, its strategic food stocks, and its oil reserves. Ahead of any war, China can be expected to shrink its exposure to Western financial pressure, selling off US treasuries and using the proceeds to buy gold or other assets beyond Washington's reach. China's holdings of US treasuries have shrunk from $1.17 trillion at the end of January 2018, right before the US-China trade war began, to just over $770 billion now. Geopolitical tensions have contributed to the decline, as China has apparently been selling treasuries to buy gold. The slumping Chinese economy has also resulted in a weaker RMB. As a result, China does not need to buy treasuries to keep its currency from appreciating. Thus far, the numbers reflect a gradual decline. But if China dumps most of its holdings in a very short period of time, a war over Taiwan is likely imminent. Another number worth watching is China's food self-sufficiency ratio. In 2000, the country was able to secure 94% of its food supplies domestically. The ratio fell to 66% in 2020, implying that China relies on imports for about a third of its needs. In a major conflict, the US Navy could cut off China's trading routes. That is why the government passed an unprecedented law in March that declares food self-sufficiency a top priority. While it's unclear how high the self-sufficiency ratio will need to be for Xi to feel comfortable, it's almost certain to be much greater than 66%. Total Chinese crude stockpiles, including both commercial stocks and government reserves, stood at 934 million barrels in January this year, enough for about 2 months of consumption. Obviously, China will need to build up these reserves if it wants to win a fight. The probability of an all-out war over Taiwan is thus currently very low. The more pressing danger, as demonstrated by this week's detention of a Taiwanese fishing vessel by the Chinese Coast Guard, will be an accidental conflict, a crisis originating in miscalculations or provocations by Beijing, Washington, or Taipei. That's what all sides should be preparing for and striving to prevent. Here ends the direct quote and today's episode. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a great Friday, have a restful weekend, and I will see you all tomorrow.